Let's talk about the SAP BW architecture next. When we talk about architecture, basically we're talking about software components, or some people call them layers in BW. In general, there are 5 layers in a data warehouse, as shown on this slide here. Also notice that I had a note at the bottom here that says in the book they actually have some kind of a mistake. They separated ETL into 3 different layers, which shouldn't be the case. Okay, generally speaking, when people talk about data warehouse, ETL is considered one component or one layer. Okay, ETL stands for, of course, extraction, transformation, and loading. That is concerned with how do we get data into the data warehouse. Okay. So the first layer is ETL. Again, that is used to get data into the data warehouse. And once data is in there, it is stored, first of all, in a staging layer. So that's the second layer after ETL. And from there, data can be further loaded into the data storage layer. Okay, so the third layer is data storage, where data is permanently stored. And then once data is stored there, it can be utilized for different purposes. So the next layer up is the one that is used to perform report and analysis. Okay, used for reporting and analysis purposes. And also another layer can be used to perform business planning, which is also part of BW. All right, so again, in general, we have 5 layers as shown here, and I will talk about each layer in more detail in the next few slides. So again, the first layer is known as ETL, is concerned with getting data into the data warehouse, and E is the E in ETL stands for extraction. Okay, people use the term extraction to mean to get data into the data warehouse in a particular mode. Okay, if you look at the bullet at the bottom there are basically 2 modes to get data into a data warehouse. One is called pull, the other is called push. All right, so if BW initiates data import, if you will, okay, then it's called the pull mode. Data is being pulled into BW using different methods. Okay, different types of data can be extracted or pulled into BW using different interfaces. The most common ones are shown at the top there, including different sources such as SAP systems or a database system. The various source systems can be SAP systems, databases, flat files, web services, third-party systems, and so on. Okay. In other words, BW can extract data from all kinds of systems, not just from SAP systems, such as ERP. Whereas the push mode is the external system pushing data into a BW. Okay, and the push mode is utilized when web services are used. Okay, basically we're talking about getting data from websites, from the web. Data being pushed from different websites into a BW, then we'll be using the push mode. And in that case, the web services are known as the source systems. okay, because we're getting data from different websites using web services. And finally, at the bottom, info packages are required to get data into BW. Okay, so when we are doing extraction, then we need to create info packages so that data can be acquired or extracted into BW. The T in ETL is known as transformation. Okay, transformation is concerned with consolidation of data so that we can eliminate technical and semantic differences. Okay, basically, we are talking about data warehouse or BW that is used to consolidate data from all kinds of sources, right? We can get data from SAP, ERP. We can get data from an Oracle database. We can get data from a website and so on. So data coming in from different sources are likely to have different formats, different definitions, different meanings for data items and so on. So all those different definitions need to be somehow eliminated or consolidated. Okay, so this way we can have one single view of the data that is consistent, that can be utilized in the data warehouse. Okay, so that's the purpose of the transformation layer that is used to eliminate any differences between data that are coming into the data warehouse. So transformation will provide a mapping between a source, such as a data source, and a data target, such as DSO or data store object, which is an object utilized in the data storage layer, which we'll talk more about later on. And then thirdly, the L in ETL stands for loading. Okay, so here we're talking about the actual loading of data within BW. Okay, actually, for data coming into the warehouse, as I mentioned earlier, that an info package will be used to load the data. But once data is inside BW, to move data further from one point to another, we will use a different object called data transfer process, or DTP. Okay, so data can be loaded from outside of BW into BW, but then within BW, data can be further moved or further loaded from one point to another. And then within BW, we'll be using data transfer process. But notice again, the book has an error on page 38. A DTP is supposed to load data, not to transform data. Okay, the T, the T in the data transfer process is used to transfer data as opposed to transform data, which is the transformation layer that we talked about earlier, right? So again, a DTP is not concerned with transformation. It is concerned with loading of data. So this is, I guess, a graphical view of the ETL process. Again, we have all kinds of systems that can provide data into BW. So they are known as source systems. Okay, source systems. So each box at the bottom of the diagram is known as a source system. So you can have a file source system, SAP source system, relational database source system, multidimensional data source system, and so on. Okay, and then each source system requires a particular interface. Like for file, you have file interface. For SAP systems, you have BI service BAPIs interface. And then for relational databases, you have DB Connect interface and so on. Okay. The book talks about those source systems and interfaces in much greater detail in chapter 7, which we will not talk about, but you can read further if you are interested. Okay, for now, just understand the terms like source systems and data sources and so on. Okay, so data sources are the objects inside BW that are created so that we can map data that is coming in from various source systems with data structures that we're going to be used. We're going to be used in BW. Okay, we'll talk about data source in more detail later on. So here's one review question, and then another one.